He was a figure in New York's Greenwich Village for years. His name was Herbert Corey. He's now a big deal among many teens.
In 1996, Tiny Tim passed out on stage while singing the song that made him famous. But the weirdest thing about him wasn't even close to how he died. A man with a loud voice and a ukulele played. He took 5 daily baths and then stopped washing his hair and called it dandruff. He married in front of 45 million people live on TV, but he said he had been single for decades.
Why is that the most shocking part?
During every show, he wore adult diapers under his Victorian clothes. Today, we're going to find out the strange truth about the man who told America he was innocent.
Tiny Tim was born with a name that would never look good on a sign. Theodore Boutros Corey. He was born in Manhattan on April 12, 1932.
The family was in the middle of a city that was always moving, even though they were having a hard time. At that time, his house was different because it was mixed up in a way that made people look. It wasn't big or safe, but it was different. Boutros Corey, his father, came to New York City from Beirut, Lebanon, through Ellis Island around 1910. He was a young textile worker looking for work in a factory.
Tilly Staff was his mother.
She was a Jewish garment worker who had left Brest-Litovsk, Belarus, when she was only 15 years old, bringing fear and grit with her like a bag she could never put down.
He grew up in 2 worlds that didn't always get along.
A father who was a Maronite Christian and a mother who was an Orthodox Jewish woman lived in a small room in Washington Heights during the Great Depression. It might be stressful and loud, but it might also be
quite strange music.
Music from the Bible would play in one part of the room while Jewish prayers came from another. It was all new to the kid in the middle, who didn't know he was building a bass. He would talk about those sounds like they made him before anyone else tried to figure him out.
Not fame, not TV, and not praise.
Just the right amount of faith, rules, and avoiding death as an immigrant.
All crammed into a small house.
He and his brother Daniel shared a bedroom in the Bronx when they were kids. And being so close made everything, even quiet, sound louder. Then, at least in his mind, the door to another time cracked open one day. He found the stack of 78 revolutions per minute music that his dad had kept.
All of a sudden, the place wasn't just an apartment. It was a stage. It was show business.
Old sounds that were rough and sad could be heard. It sounded like they were singing through a wall. He learned a lot from records with stars like Sophie Tucker. He didn't just listen, he wrote them down too. He thought about how they moved and tried them on like outfits right there in the crowded room where he didn't have much privacy. That's where his love of American music before rock began. Not in a fancy class, but when they had some free time and a record. As well as a kid who felt odd.
And being different wasn't always safe.
He had rules for the whole family and thought that following them would keep them together.
Boutros wanted people to read the Bible every day.
Herbert was so interested in the Bible that he could repeat whole psalms by heart by the time he was 6 years old. It taught him more than words. Music taught him how to be serious and how to feel that faith and music could sit next to each other. He didn't act like a normal pop singer after that because of this. He was like a man with a goal. He thought of himself as God's singer.
People thought that was strange, but he thought it was real. It seemed like the only real way to be on stage.
Then his body made being a kid tough.
He had rickets because he didn't get enough vitamin D.
It made his bones soft and weak, and it gave him a small limp. In the 1930s, up to 60% of children from poor urban homes could get rickets. Especially in towns with lots of people, bad food, and little sunlight.
It meant Herbert couldn't run like other kids could. During games, he couldn't fit in.
He found himself alone a lot, so he dug deeper into sound.
A lot more listening. He went off more.
He sat in Central Park for hours and let jazz and folk music wash over him like a second language.
Being alone didn't stop him from dreaming. It gave it food.
It helped him make a world inside himself. Music wasn't just for fun, it was a way to spend time with other people.
It got even worse in the United States during the Great Depression.
The air in the flat changed when his father, Boutros, lost his factory job after the crash of 1938.
More worry and less certainty.
Until he started making dresses at home to make money. Herbert was only 7 years old, but he did what he loved in his own way. He began looking through trash for old 78 revolutions per minute music. In the alleys near Harlem jazz clubs, looking for old songs with strange names like the Tipperary Twins.
That would have been trash for most people. It was treasure to him. He was training his ears to hear the unusual and the unnoticed. He was also taking steps to become a live museum of old American music, but he didn't know it. His name was John and he was 11 years old in 1943.
The world was not kind to boys who sounded strange.
People were after him because of his loud voice.
He was picked on so much that school stopped feeling like a safe place for him.
He got off the beaten path, and Times Square turned into a school.
At Hubert's museum, he watched sword swallowers, fire eaters, and act-outs who made money by being weird in public for hours on end.
He would always remember that place. He learned how to turn shock by looking at outfits. To pay attention.
He took the idea so literally that in his early performances he wore a bedsheet as a toga, as if he were already practicing the thought that you can stay alive by making yourself a spectacle. A few years later, in 1945, when he was 13, he started to test his voice on real people, not groups that picked him, but family members who didn't. He would sneak onto the stages at family weddings with a borrowed harmonica and play without being asked.
Singing Rudy Vallee's Honey in falsetto. Some family members were shocked and terrified. Some people laughed. Some uncles gave him money in their pockets.
It wasn't much money, but it was a big sign. He could sneak into a place that didn't want him and still make people look. By the end of 1945, he was a regular and controversial figure at those events. It was a hard lesson for him to learn early on.
You have to keep going if you want to do well. You should not stop, even if people tell you to.
In 1947, when he was 15, he bought something that would become his mark for life. A junk shop in Greenwich Village sold him his first ukulele for $5.
It wasn't a present.
It was not a good break.
It was a choice. To learn how to play left-handed, he watched other players play right-handed and copied their moves. He practiced in front of a mirror until his hands followed suit. People from all over the world lived and worked in Greenwich Village. Like a sponge, he took in the scene and learned songs and styles just by being around it. The $5 ukulele wasn't just a guitar, it was a way in. But the pressure at home did not go away even then. His parents found out in 1948 that he had been acting in secret at local PTA meetings, singing old Edwardian ballads like Under the Bamboo Tree in front of teachers and parents who didn't know what to do with him. Boutros, his father, didn't think that would work out. He asked for security. He said he would break the ukulele if Herbert didn't stop music and get a real job as a stock boy. The fight was about more than just music. People fought to stay alive, show respect, and get rid of fear. Herbert did odd things to make them happy, but he kept going after the stage because it was the only place he felt like himself. His search for a name that would protect him began in 1949. Or at least tell everyone about him before they can laugh. At amateur nights in the Bronx, he went by many stage names, such as Herbie the Falsetto King. The crowds could be mean, and the pay was only $2 per set. He would dress like early artists from another time by wearing a curly wig and a bow tie that was too big on him that he made from his mother's scarves. People made fun of them. He kept singing. He learned how to stand one night after another, while his shame tried to get him off the stage. That stubbornness turned into part of the act over time. In 1950, he was 18 years old and lived in a boarding house in Washington Heights for $10 a month. He stood on subway stations during rush hour and sang forgotten songs like The Bird on Nellie's Hat at commuters. He called himself Larry Love the Singing Canary, whose only goal was to get home. There were coins on the ground. A few people looked. Some people quickly left. He kept going anyway. Many hours were spent at the New York Public Library listening to old 78s and Edison cylinders.
He seemed to be making an archive in his mind because he was afraid the songs would die if he didn't remember them. In 1952, things got tougher when he got a part-time job at Captain Jinx's Inferno, a strip club in Hell's Kitchen.
Known for having loud crowds,
Played the ukulele as Dapper Dan between burlesque acts and tried to sing softly while drunk people demanded loud and normal music.
some bottles were thrown.
He learned how to avoid them. He later said it straight out, at Captain Jinx's Inferno, "You didn't last long if you couldn't avoid the bottles." He stayed long enough, though, to make his voice stronger. In 1953, he came in second place with a falsetto version of You Are My Sunshine at the Old Alliance Club's open night. That little prize was important to him because it showed him something.
People listened even when they didn't like what was being said.
He tried out for Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts in 1954 as Emmett Swing but was turned down because he was too strange. That word might have killed him.
It made him lean in even more, though. He began adding flower designs from the Victorian era to his set.
He got them in the weirdest way possible, by going through dumpsters at funeral homes. It sounds scary, but he thought it was play. He called himself a cartoonist of music, and he played standards with a sense of fun that was both over the top and serious. In 1956, he was going by different names, like Sir Timothy Timms, and acting in sideshows at Coney Island. He sang Tiptoe Through the Tulips in falsetto for small groups of people.
Who paid a nickel to see the strange man with the loud voice?
That one line about every nickel being a prize says it all about his heart. He didn't have much money, but he was proud. People laughed at him, but he stood there with his uke in his hand like it proved he was real.
He kept getting food from the ground.
In 1958, as Judas K. Foxglove, he opened for a calypso band at the Village Vanguard. During I Don't Care If the Sun Don't Shine, a microphone problem got him fired. At the time, it felt like a disaster. He changed his mind later and said, "I thought I was ruined, but it was actually the moment I became famous underground."
Stories get around.
People talked about the strange ukulele player who could sing at the right time and remember songs they had forgotten. By 1959, he was back to hanging out in Times Square, at places like Hubert's Museum, and at the Live Flea Show. He was still broke but refused to let that stop him from making a living off of old songs. He was known as the Singing Canary. He spent hours at the New York Public Library listening to old 78s and Edison records.
It was like he was trying to save an entire era from being lost.
On a small stage in Greenwich Village in 1960, a man called Herbert Buckingham Corey, who was 28 years old, walked on and said his name was Tiny Tim. The name itself seemed like a joke, since he was 6 feet 1 inches tall and awkward, and his voice sounded like it had been switched around 100 years. The name came from his manager, George King, who picked it after he got mixed up with a midget act on a date.
But when it stuck, Herbert put all of his weight on it.
He really got noticed for the first time at Café Bazaar, where he played long 12-hour sets, using songs from the 1890s like On the Good Ship Lollipop and Tiptoe Through the Tulips.
The beatniks didn't know what to do with him.
They made fun of them and laughed. At night, they tried to drown him out. Still, he stayed on stage and performed night after night, slowly understanding that his endurance could be used as a weapon.
The laughter turned into interest over time. Tiny Tim was often seen in the town, especially on Page 3,
where he played 6 hours a night, 6 days a week, for only $96 a month by 1963. It was hard work that barely paid the bills, but it changed him. His voice, timing, and strange confidence got better every night. At first, people came not to laugh, but to listen. They were drawn to the strange mix of innocence and passion. In 1961, around the same time, another young artist started to get close to him.
At McDougal Street's Café Wob, he was seen by Bob Dylan.
It surprised people that they became close not because they were famous or wanted to get ahead, but because they shared old records and songs that no one remembered. It was Dylan who said Tiny Tim was the last great jester. In the club kitchen late at night, Norbert the cook made hamburgers and fries while they ate and talked for hours about lead belly records and old songs that no one else seemed to care about.
Dylan was amazed by Tiny Tim's memory and how much he knew.
He asked him to come back to his flat on McDougal Street, where they made rough demos of songs like The Old Maid's Waltz. Tim's friendship put him in the center of the folk movement, even though he never quite fit the style of it. In 1962, he started to change how he behaved. At the very end, Tiny Tim, one of the most well-known clubs in the town, leaned more toward the unpredictable.
He would stop singing Shine on Harvest Moon all of a sudden to read songs.
Some people just stood there and stared, while others left. Still, a small group leaned in closer because they could feel honesty through the chaos.
Folk purists began to support him by calling him an archivist instead of a joke.
Someone was taking care of old songs that current music had forgotten about. Over time, a cult following grew, drawn to the unique mix of faith, vaudeville, and memories that no one else could make.
Tiptoe was Tiny Tim's first song. He saved up enough money to send it to the gas chambers himself in 1963. In terms of sales, it didn't do well. Still, people in the town kept the record close and passed it around like a secret. It was loud, but Elektra Records didn't take him seriously because he was too comic for folk. That rejection hurt, but it also gave him strength. He kept practicing in acting, sure that failure was just a piece of the road.
That same attitude would become more important than anyone thought 6 years later. At the scene on West 46th Street in 1964, he opened for The Love and Spoonful. This was a small but important change. Even though the room was full of new music and rising stars, Tiny Tim stood out with a left-handed ukulele and sang with Alexander's ragtime band.
John Sebastian paid close attention. He later said that Tiny Tim brought back the old charm of music for younger artists. Something important was shown that night. Tiny Tim could still hold a room, even when he was around new styles.
Then, in September 1967, everything changed.
Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In was a one-time event.
Tiny Tim showed up wearing a top hat and a cape and singing. He played a tisket, a tasket, and a lollipop on the good ship.
People in America stopped and looked. Lots of letters came in. A huge number of them.
People who saw him called him the voice of innocence.
Ukulele sales across the country went up by 200% in just a few weeks. He was hired by NBC to make recurring visits.
Someone from the outside had gotten into popular TV without smoothing out his edges, and people loved him for it. He started appearing regularly on The Tonight Show in 1968.
12 shows in a year. No one else on the show did that.
He asked a made-up character named Miss Tulips to marry him on radio one night. The ratings went up by 15%. Producers liked how wholesomely weird he was, which was a strange comfort at a time when Vietnam was in the news and there was national unrest. Reprise Records signed him around the middle of 1968. In its first week, God Bless Tiny Tim was number 7 on the Billboard chart, where it stayed for 32 weeks.
More than 200,000 copies were bought. It was hard for session performers, as he asked for real 1920s instruments and phrases. He turned down shortcuts. Tiptoe Through the Tulips sold more than 1.2 million copies and got to number 17 on the Hot 100 that same year. Before giving his approval to the finished version, he recorded it 50 times. He said a dream about Rudy Valley led him. He had played in 50 places by the end of 1968. Getting paid the same as $50,000 per show. Even before encores, he made the crowd say the Lord's Prayer. Someone left, but someone else stayed and believed. Tiny Tim married Miss Vicky live on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show in December 1969. 45 million people watched. The stage was full of tulips worth $20,000 each. It was the second most watched TV show of the decade, right after the landing on the moon. Carson made fun of it by saying it was stranger than space. Strange and Loud fame was at its peak for Tiny Tim. After that, the next few years were very different. He was nominated for a Grammy, went on trips in Europe, and dedicated a song to Jimi Hendrix at the Royal Albert Hall in 1971. By 1972, he had a home in Las Vegas that paid $100,000 a week. Still, the shock went away slowly. He went from being the star of the show to a small fan base. Even so, Tiny Tim never changed who he was.
That, more than any spot on the charts, kept his story alive. Even though everyone thought they knew where Tiny Tim was, he was always hard to put. People saw the hair, the suit, the uke, and the voice, which could sound sweet and strange at the same time. But underneath it all was a man who kept trying to combine music, faith, and attention into one life, even though the stitches kept coming apart. In December 1968, he accidentally learned about the past of the Beatles. It was being made for the official fan club, a Christmas flexi disc, and Tiny Tim's crazy take on Nowhere Man, which was recorded in New York with George Harrison's help. It came out on the same disc as odd little band snippets and a helter-skelter that was sped up. Harrison even praised him and thanked him on the record. And word got around that Tiny Tim had also been seen around Abbey Road during the time of Let It Be, playing the guitar for Paul McCartney. Tiny Tim found a way to stand out in a city full of well-groomed stars. It wasn't because he fit in, but because he wouldn't. The following year, on December 17, 1969, he made his private life public.
On Johnny Carson's show The Tonight Show, he married Miss Vicky. It was seen by more than 45 million people.
For Tiptoe Through the Tulips, the stage was filled with 10,000 bright, loud flowers. At first, it seemed like a fairy tale that could not go wrong. But the marriage sounded more like a show than a home very fast.
They had a girl in 1971. Her name is Tulip Victoria. But even family life had its strange rules.
They lived in two different Brooklyn brownstones that were linked by a hallway, which was not the norm. It was said that Tiny Tim would visit in a way that was more official than friendly, like he wasn't sure how to live in that role. By 1977, they were no longer together. There were stories about how he talked about women and desire in large groups and made strange statements, as if he was trying to explain himself.
And farther away.
Then something happened in his work that showed how unpredictable he really was. He was hired by Filmation in 1973 to do the role of Gilligan in the animated show The New Adventures of Gilligan. On paper, it sounded great. The show was supposed to be fun for kids by having Tiny Tim sing sea shanties. But things changed after just one show. He asked that Bible verses be added to the script so that he could teach while singing.
The people in charge didn't see it coming. They didn't know what to do with it.
Was fired during production, but only after one recording session. It was never made clear what line he wanted, but the point was already clear. He couldn't separate what he believed from what he did, even though the job asked for it to be simple. There was less light and odd things in the rooms as the years went by. He was on Howard Stern's radio show in 1975. And talked about a tough time when he worked as a freak fiddler at a Florida fair for one night and made $5,000. He talked about playing the ukulele between alligator shows, holding onto it like it was the only thing that would never let him down. He felt both ashamed and proud about it because the money helped him stay alive and pay for another record. He did 3 shows a day for $300 a week with the Clyde Beatty Cole Brothers Circus by 1980. He sang, moved to the beat of the show, and leaned into the weirdness that most people laughed at first but then forgot about. Behind the scenes, he even taught young people how to play the ukulele, as if he were trying to show that it was never a joke for him. When 1984 came around, things got even stranger.
He was cast in Blood Harvest, a low-budget horror movie.
After director Bill Rebane saw him play at a beer tent fair in Wisconsin. Tiny Tim was given $1,000 to play Merv, a crazy clown who could make a uke sound dangerous. He let out a falsetto scream of "Away, Joe" during the tryout. Later, the director said it was the stuff of nightmares.
The movie didn't do well at the box office because it was rushed and didn't have a big budget.
But the part made him famous, and he got a cult.
An afterlife. It also showed something hurtful.
He was ready to go through any door that stayed open, even if it led to a room with cheap scary lights and nervous laughter. Then 1985 came along and made even more noise. In that year, his fight with Howard Stern reached its peak when Stern made fun of his cleanliness and habits on the radio.
Tiny Tim sued for slander and asked for $50,000 in compensation.
Then Stern booked him for 50 shows instead, which turned the whole thing into a piece.
Tiny Tim kept coming back, making fights into TV shows. He even brought a jar of his salsa diet recipe and said it was the key to good health and living a long life.
He also put out the controversial song Santa Claus Has Got the AIDS this year around the same time. In 1985, it made a lot of noise because it made clear references to the AIDS epidemic. He said it was the religion of public health, but radio stations and fans didn't believe him. And it made his image even stronger as a man who couldn't help but touch the nerve that everyone else tried to avoid. As he aged, his life seemed to be made up of more and more strange habits. In the 1960s, people bathed up to 5 times a day, which was a big change in how clean people were.
With rose-scented soap, to later claiming his hair-trapped divine inspiration.
He was the subject of stories about how to turn dandruff into holy dust. In 1993, his manager said that he drank 2 full jars of patch picante salsa every day and ate raw russet potatoes that he peeled with his teeth. They called this complete nutrition and said that the gas was caused by something spiritual and evil. There were strange rules for even his relationships. He got married again, this time to Miss Jan in 1984 and to Miss Sue in 1995. He also said he wasn't married after the 1960s. There are stories about strange pre-play practices that involve prayer and long hours of guilt. People also said that he wore adult diapers under his Victorian clothes during long sets. This was a habit that went back to when he was busking, and he did it to be modest and avoid breaks. He gave an annual Most Beautiful Girl award to girls he liked just for fun, as if he wanted to get closer, but only if they would keep him safe. In 1990, he tried to get his fans excited about him again. He put out his own record called Tiny Tim Rocks and sold it through mail order. It had polka versions of rock songs from the 1950s like Great Balls of Fire. It was said to have sold around 10,000 copies, enough to pay for a short tour of the Midwest. He brought back his ukulele trick where he could play with both hands and asked fans to bring their own and join him on stage. For a moment, it sounded like the purest form of him.
It was messy and close.
Not the joke or the novelty act, just an artist making a small world where he was still important. But his body was telling him something already. At a ukulele event in Massachusetts in 1992 at the Montague Book Mill, he had a heart attack as he started to tiptoe through the tulips. He passed out in the middle of the set, but he insisted on finishing anyway, telling the doctors backstage, "The Lord has more songs for me," before passing out again. Many of the 135 people there were shocked and in tears as they cheered as he was taken away on a bed. He ended up in intensive care for a few days, and the story became a tale. It was about the same thing that his whole life was about. Even though stopping could have saved him, he didn't know how to do it. Even more, he worked hard in 1996. He finished his last trip with more than 100 shows at fairs and small venues in the Midwest. Each show earned him about $200. At one Des Moines County fair, he debuted a new stage name, the Eternal Troubadour. Even though his health was getting worse, he insisted on signing Bibles for fans after every show. Someone told him about his heart, and he answered in a way that sounded both brave and worn out. "I'll be lucky to live another 10 years. It's an even bigger miracle after 5 years.
I'm ready for anything that comes up."
Despite this, he kept going.
Then came the night that people will always remember.
Tiny Tim was 64 years old and already having a hard time in the middle of his set on November 30, 1996, at a women's club in Minneapolis. Even though his face turned pale, he kept playing on Tiptoe Through the Flowers, as if finishing the song would keep the ending from him. As he fell over after the last note, he even damaged his $800 Beltona ukulele. He was taken to the hospital right away, but at 1:10 a.m., he died of a heart attack.
That night. In the simplest way, it was creepy. Throughout his life, he turned himself into a live show. Afterwards, before he died, he tried to give the world one more song. The story kept getting better after he died. Later, his daughter Tulip Victoria Corey shared rare home movies and memories that showed a softer side of him. For example, Tiny taught her how to play the ukulele when she was little and made her her own lullabies. Along with this, the story of his hidden depth grew when bootleg tapes were said to have been found in 2004. Such as 1967 jam sessions with Bob Dylan.
People also said that his estate had more than 500 recordings that had not been released before. These included up to 1,000 old American songs, rare versions, and even a ragtime cover of Stairway to Heaven from the 1970s. His name was put in the Ukulele Hall of Fame in 2000. And it was said that he made around $10 million over the course of his life. At one point, the Beatles' flexi disc he was on became so valuable that it could fetch up to $5,000 at sale.